What would you do if, on the very night meant to celebrate your marriage, the man you trusted most stood up in front of your family and announced he was leaving you for your own sister? That's exactly what happened to Looney. But neither her husband Obari, nor her sister Zara, knew the storm that was about to fall on them. Looney wanted everything to be perfect for her anniversary night. She spent many days preparing, thinking of every small detail. She chose soft candles that made the room glow warmly, and she placed fresh flowers everywhere, their fragrance filling the air. The tables were set with care, shining glasses and plates neatly arranged, as if each one carried her love. She wore her favorite dress, the one Obari once said made her look like the most beautiful woman in the world. In her heart, Looney believed this night would be special, a night to remember forever. She thought it would bring her and her husband closer, reminding them of the love that started their journey years ago. She imagined laughter, gentle words, and maybe even a promise of a brighter future together. Her family filled the hall, their voices rising in cheerful chatter. Some clapped when they saw the decorations, others smiled, whispering about how beautiful the place looked. Plates of food were brought out, glasses were raised, and everyone waited for the moment when Obari would stand and give his toast. Looney looked at him with love in her eyes, her heart full of hope. She thought this was her chance to finally feel cherished, to hear words that would heal the distance she sometimes felt. As she moved between the tables greeting guests, she felt proud. Proud that she had created this evening with her own hands, proud that despite the struggles, she and Obari had reached another year together. Every candle that flickered seemed to whisper promises of warmth and love. She smiled at her sister Zara across the table, not knowing what storm was hidden behind that smile. The music played softly in the background, and the atmosphere felt almost magical. Everyone was waiting, glasses in hand, expecting a toast of love, a speech about commitment and family. Looney's heart beat faster, filled with excitement. She sat down beside Obari, holding his hand tightly, believing she was about to hear words that would stay with her forever. For Looney, this was not just a dinner. It was a celebration of loyalty, of shared dreams, of everything they had built together. It was proof that love was still alive. She took a deep breath, her eyes shining, ready for the moment that would seal her happiness. She had no idea that the night she thought would unite her heart with Obari's would instead break it into pieces. When the moment came for Obari to speak, everyone leaned forward with eager faces. They expected him to say sweet words about Looney, to thank her for planning such a beautiful night, to raise his glass and celebrate their love. Looney herself looked at him with shining eyes, waiting to hear the praise she thought would follow. But instead of a smile, his face turned stiff. He cleared his throat, and the warmth in the room suddenly felt heavy. His voice was cold, sharp, and without hesitation. He said, "Tonight, I choose truth over pretense. I can no longer live this lie. I'm leaving Looney for her sister Zara." For a moment nobody moved. The words echoed like a storm that no one was ready for. Glasses hung in the air, halfway to lips that never touched them. Forks dropped quietly on plates, but no one dared to breathe. The laughter that had filled the room just seconds earlier disappeared into a heavy silence. All eyes turned first to Obari, then to Looney, then slowly to Zara. The air itself felt frozen. Looney sat still, her body refusing to react, but inside her heart cracked into 1,000 pieces. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, believing it would bring her happiness. Instead, the man she trusted most had chosen this night, in front of everyone she loved, to tear her world apart. Her chest tightened as if it could no longer hold air, and her eyes burned, but she refused to let the tears fall. Her sister sat with her head slightly bowed, pretending to look surprised, but the truth was already clear. The betrayal was not just from a husband, but from the sister she had once protected, trusted, and loved. The silence in the hall was louder than any scream. Even the clinking of a spoon seemed like thunder. Family members looked at one another in shock, some covering their mouths, others shaking their heads. Nobody dared to speak, because the wound that had just been opened was too deep. Looney's world had shifted in a single sentence. She was not just losing her husband, she was losing her sister. And she was losing them both in the cruelest way possible. On the night that was meant to celebrate her love, she sat frozen, staring at Obari, who showed no regret, and at Zara, whose eyes betrayed guilt mixed with boldness. That night, The celebration turned into a battlefield, and the first strike had already left her shattered. Zara sat quietly at first, lowering her eyes as if she was too shy to face anyone. People looked at her, waiting for her to deny what Obari had just confessed, waiting for her to say it was all a mistake. For a moment, even Looney hoped her sister would speak up and prove her husband wrong. But instead, Zara slowly stood from her chair, her movements calm, almost graceful. She reached for Obari's hand, lacing her fingers with his as if the world around them no longer existed. Her voice came out soft, almost gentle, but every word cut like a knife. "We didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered, her eyes now fixed on Looney. "But we love each other." The words echoed in the silent room, and that silence was broken by gasps, sharp intakes of breath, and whispers spreading like fire. People could not believe what they were seeing. Looney's knees trembled under the table, but she refused to fall apart in front of them. This was not just about a husband's betrayal anymore. This was her sister, her own blood, openly admitting to stealing the man she built her life with. The girl she once defended in front of neighbors, the one she used to give her clothes to, the one she had carried through childhood storms, now stood there holding Obari's hand as if it was her right. Memories rushed back to Looney. For 5 long years, she had lived under the shadow of favoritism. Her parents always praised Zara, always gave her the best, while Looney learned to survive with less. She had been ignored, overlooked, and pushed aside, but through it all she had still loved her sister. She had thought blood was stronger than envy, but tonight proved otherwise. This betrayal pierced deeper than all the years of being forgotten. The family sat stunned, unable to move, as if they were watching a tragedy unfold in slow motion. Some turned their eyes away from Looney, unable to bear the pain in her face. Others stared at Zara in disbelief, wondering how she could betray her sister so openly. Zara leaned closer to Obari, her lips trembling as though she expected sympathy, but all Looney saw was the cruel satisfaction hiding in her eyes. The sister she trusted had chosen this path, and she had chosen it without shame. Looney's heart bled quietly, but her silence was louder than any cry. This moment was not just betrayal. It was the breaking of every bond she thought could never be broken. Looney sat frozen, her chest rising and falling as if her breath could no longer find its way. The weight of betrayal from Obari and Zara already pressed on her like a heavy stone. But what came next would break her even deeper. The room was filled with shocked faces, some whispering, others refusing to meet her eyes. Just as Looney hoped someone, anyone, would speak up for her, her mother leaned forward with a faint smile. "All this noise," her mother said softly, her eyes moving between Zara and Obari. "At least Obari will stay in the family." The words fell into the silence like a dagger. The room gasped again, but for Looney, the sound disappeared. Her ears rang as if her world had gone hollow. She stared at her mother, her lips parting, but no words came. That single sentence did more damage than Obari's announcement and Zara's betrayal combined. For years, Looney had carried the feeling of being the less loved daughter. She was the one who was always told to sacrifice, to endure, to stay quiet when Zara received the praise, the gifts, the affection. She had convinced herself that maybe her mother's love was just hidden, that deep down, she mattered too. But tonight, in front of everyone, her mother proved her wrong. It wasn't her tears that mattered. It wasn't her broken heart. What mattered to them was that the family name stayed neat, that Obari remained connected to their bloodline. They were willing to crush her to protect their image. Looney's hands shook under the table. She pressed her palms together, forcing herself not to crumble. She searched her mother's face, hoping for regret, for some sign that it was a slip of the tongue. But instead, her mother's faint smile lingered, calm and almost relieved, as though everything had finally fallen into place. The relatives around them exchanged glances. Some frowned in disapproval, but none of them spoke up. The silence confirmed what Looney had always feared. Her feelings were invisible, her suffering an acceptable price as long as the family looked unbroken. Her throat tightened, and she felt her heart shatter in a way she had never known before. Betrayed by her husband, betrayed by her sister, and now abandoned by her own mother. Every bond she thought was sacred had been torn away in one single night. She sat there, her face pale but her eyes burning with a quiet storm. In that moment she understood the truth. She was completely alone in this room full of family. And yet somewhere deep inside, a new strength began to rise. born not from their approval, but from their rejection. Looney sat still as the room closed in on her. Every word, every glance, every betrayal pressed down on her shoulders, but she refused to collapse in front of them. Her eyes burned with unshed tears, yet she lifted her chin slowly, forcing herself to look composed. Obari and Zara still held hands like victors, and her mother sat with calm approval, as if her happiness was no longer important. The humiliation was complete, but Looney would not give them the satisfaction of watching her break. She placed her napkin gently on the table, her movements steady, deliberate. For a brief moment, she looked around the hall at the people who had shared laughter with her minutes ago. None of them spoke now. Their silence confirmed that she was standing alone in this war. But Looney decided she would not plead, not scream, not curse. Instead, she stood tall, her dress flowing around her like a shield, her dignity becoming the only weapon she had left. Without a single word, she wiped the corner of her eye and began walking toward the door. Each step echoed like a statement, louder than any speech she could have given. Family members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, expecting her to cry or collapse, but she moved like someone who had already made peace with pain. They thought she was walking away broken, but inside her silence, something sharper was forming, a plan that none of them could see. Obari avoided her eyes, his grip on Zara's hand tightening as if to prove his choice. Zara's lips twitched nervously, unsure whether to smile or hide. Their triumph looked weaker as Looney walked past them without a glance. She did not bow her head. She did not falter. Her calmness unsettled them more than anger ever could. When she reached the door, she paused for a second, her back straight, her shoulders squared. She did not turn around, but everyone felt the weight of her presence. In that silence, they realized something. Looney was not defeated. She was only leaving the battlefield to return stronger. Then she stepped out, closing the door gently behind her. The hall remained frozen, filled with whispers and uneasy faces. They believed she was too wounded to recover, that she would hide in shame while they moved on with their plans. But deep inside, Looney was already thinking of her next move. The night they thought had destroyed her was the night she began to rise. When Looney reached home, she shut the door behind her and leaned against it for a moment, letting the weight of the evening sink in. Her heart was still heavy, but her face was calm. She had walked away from the dinner without a word, but silence was not weakness. Silence was her shield, and now it was time to turn it into her strength. She crossed the room slowly, her steps steady, until she reached the corner of her bedroom where a safe was hidden. Few people even knew it existed, and Obari had never asked. With steady hands she opened the safe. Inside lay the pieces of her life that she had quietly built while everyone underestimated her. One by one, she pulled out the files and spread them on the table. Property deeds, bank shares, business ownership records, signed contracts, all under her name. They were more than papers, they were proof of her resilience, her foresight, and her independence. For years, Obari had walked around acting like the man of wealth, the provider of the family. He boasted about the house they lived in, the cars parked in the driveway, and the business he claimed as his success. People believed him, and Looney never corrected them. She allowed him to take the praise, to stand tall as the one who gave her a good life. What no one knew was that every single thing he showed off had her name written on it. She remembered the long nights she spent signing documents while he slept, the times she invested wisely when he was wasting money to impress others. She thought she was protecting their future as a couple, building something strong for both of them. But now she saw it differently. What she had been protecting all along was herself. Without even realizing it, she had prepared for this very moment. Looney's fingers moved gently over the documents, her eyes steady and sharp. Obari thought he had the upper hand, leaving her for Zara and believing he still carried the wealth with him. But he had no idea that the empire he bragged about was never his. His betrayal would soon meet the truth, and the truth would strip him bare. She gathered the files neatly, locking them back into place, but her heart felt lighter. For the first time that night, a faint smile touched her lips. They thought she had lost everything, but in reality, she held everything in her hands. The man who betrayed her, the sister who envied her, and the mother who dismissed her. They were all about to learn that she was not powerless. She was the one with the keys to it all. Days passed after the anniversary dinner, but the sting of betrayal still hung heavy in the air. Obari and Zara, however, moved quickly as if nothing had happened. They walked around boldly, speaking of their new life together, dreaming of travel, parties, and a future built on the wealth they believed was in their hands. Zara glowed with excitement, imagining herself as the center of attention, wearing fine clothes, living in luxury, and finally stepping out of her sister's shadow. Obari boasted to her about the life they would enjoy, proud of himself for choosing what he thought was love and power combined. But while they laughed and planned, Looney worked quietly in the background. She did not waste time with arguments or tears. Instead, she went straight to her lawyer with the secret files she had kept safe for years. Signatures were drawn, legal papers were filed, and within days, everything tied to Obari's so-called wealth was frozen. The cars he flaunted, the mansion he claimed as his, and even the business he bragged about, all of it was locked under Looney's authority. The storm began to gather slowly. At first, Obari tried to withdraw money for his big plans with Zara, but the account showed restrictions. He thought it was a mistake, so he tried again, only to find the same block. Confusion turned to panic as he called the bank, only to be told that all assets were secured under Looney's ownership. His confidence began to crack, but he hid it from Zara, not ready to admit the truth. Meanwhile, Zara started to notice the small signs. The expensive shopping trips Obari had promised were suddenly postponed. The vacation he bragged about kept being delayed. When she asked questions, he brushed them off with excuses, telling her to be patient. But her excitement slowly turned to suspicion. The glamorous life she thought she had stepped into began to feel like an empty promise. Behind closed doors, Obari grew restless, pacing rooms he no longer controlled. He realized too late that while he was busy betraying Looney, she had been protecting everything he relied on. The man who thought he had won was now standing on nothing. Zara's smile faded day by day. The dream she betrayed her sister for was slipping away before her eyes. And Looney, the woman they thought was broken, was the one holding the power. The storm was no longer gathering. It had already begun, and they were right in the center of it. The family had gathered once again, this time for a weekend lunch at their parents' home. It was supposed to be a cheerful event, filled with laughter and food, but everyone knew the tension in the air was heavy. Whispers about the anniversary dinner still circled among relatives, but most came out of curiosity, wanting to see how things would unfold between the sisters and Obari. Obari and Zara walked in hand, their heads high, pretending they were proud and unshaken. Zara wore a bright dress, trying to look radiant, while Obari forced his usual confidence, smiling at anyone who looked their way. They acted like a couple ready to start a new chapter, and for a while, the family gave them cautious smiles, though some eyes held silent judgment. But then, the sound of footsteps at the door drew everyone's attention. Looney entered the room. She walked with grace, her face calm, her posture straight. There was no sign of the broken woman they had seen days ago. Instead, there was strength in her eyes, and her silence demanded respect. A lawyer followed behind her, carrying a folder of documents. The room grew still as she took her place at the table, facing Obari and Zara directly. Obari's smile faltered, and Zara shifted uneasily. Something in Looney's presence made them nervous, but they tried to hide it. Looney waited until everyone was seated, then nodded to the lawyer. The folder was opened, and papers were laid on the table for all to see. Property deeds, business ownership papers, bank records, all bearing Looney's name. She looked straight at Obari, her voice calm but powerful. Everything you brag about was never yours, Obari. Not the house, not the cars, not the business. Every single thing you claimed was your success has always belonged to me. Murmurs filled the room as relatives leaned closer, their eyes widening at the documents. Then she turned to Zara, her sister who once held her hand as a child, now standing as her biggest betrayer. Her voice carried no anger, only truth. And you, Zara. You chose to betray me, your own sister, for a man who has nothing. You left me for an empty-handed man. The words cut through the room sharper than any blade. Zara's face went pale, her eyes darting from the papers to Obari, searching for reassurance, but none came. Obari's jaw tightened as he realized his mask was slipping, and everyone could see the truth. The family erupted into whispers, gasps, and murmurs, some shaking their heads, others looking at Looney with newfound respect. The proud image Obari and Zara had tried to create crumbled in seconds. What they thought was power turned into humiliation. And in front of the very family that once doubted her, Looney stood stronger than ever. The moment the truth was laid bare on the table, Zara's world began to crack. She stared at the documents spread out in front of everyone, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of her chair. All the dreams she had wrapped around Obari, dreams of wealth, status, and a life better than Looney's, vanished in seconds. The glamorous future she had betrayed her sister for was nothing but smoke. Tears welled in her eyes, and soon they spilled down her cheeks. She covered her face, but the sobs escaped anyway. For the first time, she felt the shame of her choices, the weight of knowing she had destroyed her sister's trust for a man who had nothing to offer her. Obari sat stiff, his eyes darting from the papers to Looney's calm face. The confidence he once carried was gone. His throat tightened, and sweat gathered at his temples. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked under the pressure of humiliation. "Looney, please, it was a mistake. I was confused. I didn't mean to hurt you." His words stumbled out, weak and desperate, but they only exposed his fear of losing everything. He reached a hand across the table, as if to plead, but Looney did not move. Her stillness was louder than his begging. She had once given him her love, her trust, her loyalty, but he had thrown it away in front of everyone. Now he wanted forgiveness not out of love, but out of need. The wealth he once flaunted was gone. The family respect he once held had shattered, and the woman he betrayed was the only one with the power to lift him again. Relatives exchanged uneasy glances. Some whispered to each other, shaking their heads at Obari's downfall. Others looked at Zara, watching her break down in tears, realizing her envy had led her to a man who could no longer provide even the smallest comfort. The family that once judged Looney in silence now saw the truth of who had been strong all along. Obari tried again, his voice cracking as he leaned forward. "Give me another chance. We can fix this. We can pretend none of this happened." But his words carried no weight. Everyone could see that his empire had collapsed, and with it his pride. Looney finally spoke, her voice calm and steady. "You made your choice in front of me and in front of this family. Now live with it." The finality in her tone silenced the room. Obari lowered his head, his shoulders heavy, while Zara's sobs grew louder. The man who once betrayed her was stripped of power, and the sister who envied her stood humiliated. In that moment, the collapse was complete. Everything they thought they had gained was gone, and the woman they tried to break stood taller than ever. When the room grew quiet after Obari's desperate begging and Zara's tears, all eyes turned to Looney. She stood tall, her face calm but filled with strength. She looked around the hall, at every relative who once mocked her, who whispered behind her back, who believed Obari's lies and Zara's charm. This was the moment they expected her to crumble, but instead, she rose higher than ever before. Looney slowly gathered the papers back into her hands, lifted her head, and spoke with a steady voice that carried through the room. "You betrayed me at my own table," she said, her eyes fixed on Obari and Zara. "But tonight, I reclaim what is mine, my name, my life, my respect." The words struck them like thunder. Obari lowered his head, powerless, and Zara hid her face in shame. For years, they had acted as though she was nothing, as though her success belonged to them. But now, the truth stood clear before everyone. The cars, the house, the business, the wealth, all of it was under her name. Nothing tied to Obari's pride belonged to him. Nothing Zara dreamed of could ever be hers. The family that once dismissed Looney shifted uncomfortably in their seats, whispering in disbelief. They realized they had misjudged her all along. She was never weak. She was never dependent. She was the true power, the true backbone behind everything Obari flaunted. And now, she was reclaiming it without hesitation. Obari tried one last time to rise, reaching his hand out as if she would forgive him. "Looney, please, it was a mistake. I was blinded. Give me another chance." But she only gave him one look, not of anger, but of finality. A look that told him his chapter in her life was over. Zara could not even lift her head. All her plans for a glamorous life had turned to dust. She had betrayed her own blood, only to end up beside a man with nothing. Her tears fell silently, but no one in the room pitied her. They all saw the truth. Envy had destroyed her. Looney turned and walked toward the door, each step measured, graceful, unshaken. She didn't just carry dignity, she carried victory. She carried the weight of every insult, every betrayal, and transformed it into strength. and as the doors closed behind her, the hall fell into silence. The people left inside realized they had lost her forever. That night, Looney didn't just walk away. She rose. She left with everything they tried to take, and with a life finally her own. If this story touched you, don't scroll just yet. Would you have forgiven Obari and Zara, or walked away like Looney? Broken Heart Gemstone, tell me in the comments. I'm reading them all. Fire. And if you want more powerful stories like this, make sure you like, share, and subscribe, because the next one will hit even harder.